Добрый вечер.
Good evening. Dear Mr. Putin, Your Majesty, King Abdullah, esteemed Mr. Aliyev, Mr. President Tokayev, and esteemed Mr. President Duterte. Dear friends, dear guests, we are opening the final session of the 16th annual meeting of the International Discussion Club Valdai. This year, the key topic of our discussion is the East in the broader sense of that word, the processes which are taking place on the huge territory from the Middle East to Eastern Asia. We have chosen that topic for the discussion not because Russia is increasing its presence in the East, although this is obvious. The report which we have prepared for the session, we make an assumption. What we used to call the world order is no longer existent. There are no rules, principles, and other regulations pertinent to the behavior are non-existent. So we are entering the age of a totally free ride when everyone acts at his or her own disposition. And the risks for irresponsible behavior are on the rise, and the balance is possible only in the case if the viewpoints, interests, and mindset of all the stakeholders of the international processes are taken into consideration. And the East is not an exception. The East is actually getting back its historical place, and this is what we're going to discuss with our remarkable guests. And the moderator would be our outstanding Oriental Studies academician of the Russian Academy of Sciences, and since the year, he is also the chair of our modest but still courageous Academy of the Valdai Club, Mr. Naumkin. The floor is yours. Thank you so much, Mr. Lukyanov, and let me announce this meeting open and pass the floor to President of Russia, Mr. Putin.
Ваше Величество,
Your Majesty, King Abdullah, Your Excellency, the President of Azerbaijan, Your Excellency, the President of Kazakhstan, Mr. Duterte, ladies and gentlemen. I'm glad to welcome you to Sochi at the annual meeting of the Valdai Discussion Club. As per tradition, here at this platform, we try to refrain from discussing the concurrent political issues, even refrain from diplomatic discussions, and we try to actually deliberate at length when it comes to the historical, cultural, and philosophical context. We try to peek into the future to shape its contours. This time, the organizers have offered us a truly inexhaustible and all-engrossing topic, the East. The role of Asia as the largest and the most densely populated part of the world and its role in the global affairs. The relationships of Russia and Asian states have always had special significance for us and were very important for us. And this nature can be explained not only by modern realities, but also by its history. India and China, Egypt and Iran, Turkey and Japan, the countries of the Central and Southeast Asia are the successors of great ancient civilizations. They have brought many gifts to the humanity, unique know-how, knowledge, and technologies, as well as achievements in medicine, mathematics, culture, and arts. Among the intellectual elites and creative people, Asia has always awakened a special kind of feeling. It seemed attractive and mysterious. It was known as the source of spiritual force and wisdom, perhaps not always understandable, but nevertheless quite tempting and interesting. In Russia, The bright colors of the East have inspired many writers, poets, artists and musicians, such as Pushkin and Rimsky-Korsakov, Arseniev and Vereshchagin, Kandinsky and Rerich. Russian audiences, and not only Russian audience, are well familiar with those names. And today Asia, with its vast expanse, it spans from the Maghreb to the Middle East to the East and Southeast Asia, brings back its deserved place into international affairs. It correlates with its great legacy and its today's vast and growing potential. The strengthening of Asian states can be seen in all of the areas of life, and especially in the economic area. In region, we have already observed the formation of more than a third of the global GDP. The level of life increases higher than the global average. We can see them actively implementing the most advanced technologies. We also observe unprecedented in scope integrational processes, and globalization actually attracts certain foreign players as well as whole neighboring sub-regions. Asian countries show very impressive examples of progress, but at the same time they keep their coloring, they safeguard their traditions, and they remember their roots. And in moving forward, they prove that the principles of state sovereignty do not contradict openness and globalization, that sustainable development is possible on the basis of independence and autonomy, and not on the basis of refuting autonomy and independence, that the growing economic humanitarian potential of the states requires political substance. It's only logical that they used the fruits of the globalization effectively and wisely, the benefits of globalization and technical revolution. And now they're among the economic leaders, and the Asian states now trying to play a major role in global affairs as well. They are defending their own opinion on the key issues of the international agenda. They value their independence, and they hope that their objectively growing influence would be acknowledged. We believe it is only fair and is fully in line with today's and future reality. By the way, back in its day, the so-called awakening of Asia, that is the national and cultural renaissance of the countries of the region, played a major role in the democratization of international affairs, and now it's evident that global issues cannot be resolved without Asia. Undoubtedly, you can be inert and try to do it like in the old days, but legitimacy and the practical significance, the value of such solutions, which seek to become global and universal, is highly doubtful. And the world, in major part thanks to Asian states, has objectively become multipolar and, as a consequence, more complex. But multipolarity itself, and I've already talked about this, is not a panacea. Moreover, it does not translate into the fact that acute issues and contradictions in international affairs would be resolved just overnight. The authors of the annual report of the Valdai Discussion Club state, and we just heard that we are entering an era when the global order would not exist at all. That's what was just said. Yes, such a scenario is indeed possible, but it harbors many threats, and we understand that. So we hope that however complex the relationships between states might be, however dangerous the legal lacunes might be, for example, when it comes to nuclear and missiles and other weapons, the global order based on the key role of the international law would be transformed, but would remain intact. And we will all work towards protecting it. Another way would lead to global catastrophes for the humanity. Undoubtedly, the global system is very complex, but at the same time very interconnected. Everyone has their own objective interests, but they do not always correlate with the interests of others. This is evident. But then there's this overall common sense of responsibility, And I hope that common sense is also present, as well as our desire to be secure and safe. That is why we need the global order to be systematic, but we also need to remain flexible and apply non-linear solutions, by which I do not mean to refute the system altogether, but to try to organize this very complicated process guided by the current situation. That is why we need to take into account various cultural and value systems to work in consort by overcoming various stereotypes and geopolitical models. Only by doing that we can effectively resolve all the issues on a global and regional and on the national level as well. And we have such examples before us. Those of you who were present at the Valdai Club discussion in 2015 probably remember that back in those days we made the decision to start Russian operation in Syria. And I can tell you frankly that not everyone, including the experts in the hall, believed that it would be successful. Vice versa, they were quite skeptical about it, and some of them even asked, like, why do you need to do that? They asked us whether we understand in what kind of hornet's nests we are getting, and some foreign partners, and I don't mean those who are present here, but just our foreign partners with whom we work in the international arena, have tried to counteract and hinder us. But I would like to focus your attention on the main thing that was done. And first and foremost, when I talk about what was done for Russia, because I represent Russia's interest, we have defeated the international terrorism, which was winning in Syria back in the day. We have prevented the return and infiltration into our country, as well as in the neighboring states, with whom we have a visa-free regime and we have transparent borders. So we have prevented the infiltration of hundreds and maybe thousands of armed cutthroats. For over several years, the major part of the Syrian territory was liberated from the terrorists, and the level of violence has gone down significantly. Together with our partners within the Astana format and with the support of the UN, we have managed to launch the intra-Syrian political process. For that, we have very close contacts with Iran, Turkey, Israel, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, as well as other countries of the Middle East and the United States. Colleagues, you would agree that such a complicated diplomatic makeup of different states with very different sentiment when it comes to their sentiments for each other would hardly be fathomable just several years ago. But we have managed to accomplish that, and we believe that Syrian resolution would be a model for the resolution of various regional crises. And in the majority of cases, diplomatic mechanisms would be successful, and the use of force is a forced exception from this rule. In Syria, we have faced an attempt to create a terrorist quasi-state with their own true terrorist army. Yes, it might seem sometimes that many new and old problems and crises are too complicated, and we cannot even begin to think about approaching those issues. But now it's time for original, non-standard steps and solutions. And in Syria, Russia, together with its partners, and we could not do it alone, we followed international law, respected the sovereignty of the country, and prioritized the security and safety of the people, have accomplished a lot. I'm convinced that on the basis of such approaches, we can resolve other existing problems, including problems in Asia. For example, the situation on the Korean Peninsula that has long been at stalemate. And I would like to highlight, when the US decided to talk directly to North Korea without no preconditions, when they refuted their very flagrant rhetoric when it comes to, for example, insults, then we had hope for peaceful resolution. So a lot remains to be done, but we are moving forward, and we have to give credit to the brave actions of President Trump, who had this non-standard thinking, because for many decades American presidents have ignored North Korea, thought about it as an outcast, while President Trump has managed to make this truly historic step to overcome this demarcation line of misunderstanding and alienation. He met with Kim Jong-un and started the negotiation process. And I would like to reiterate that it is on the principles of mutual cooperation, respect, acknowledging each other's interests, as well as refusing from various blinders and bloc philosophy, can we resolve the most complex conflicts. For example, the Palestino-Israeli conflict, Afghan conflict, the situation around the Iranian nuclear program. It is in this logic that Russia, in July of this year, presented its concept of ensuring collective security in the Gulf. I believe that taking into account this very acute and unpredictable situation in this region, this idea remains highly relevant. We suggest that we set aside our prejudices, our claims, and start from scratch to create an organization on security and cooperation in the region, which would include, apart from the Gulf countries, Russia, China, the United States, the EU, India, and other interested states as observers. Dear participants, the basis for building equal political relationships looking into the future, including between Asian countries, is very close economic partnership, which opens up real prospects for sustainable and long-term development for all. As an example, I can give you transport interconnectivity. Without the creation of modern car, maritime, and railway infrastructure, it's impossible to develop trade, industrial cooperation, to have any sort of exchanges in other areas. That is why we need to ponder about how we can speed up the formation of such a Eurasian transport system, a true system of longitudinal and latitudinal trade routes. Russia is open for such cooperation, and we are implementing a number of joint projects. For example, the trade route north-south, which would pass our territory from European countries through the Caspian region to the Central Asian states, such as Iran and India. Another route, Europe, Western China, would connect Russian ports in the Baltic Sea with the ports in the Yellow Sea. Another promising route, this is the Arctic, Siberia, Asia. Through Eastern Siberia, the center of Eurasia, we will connect through transport routes the ports of the Northern Sea route with the ports of the Pacific and Indian Oceans. In order to implement this idea, to find all the missing links, we want to speed up the construction of railways towards the port of Sabeta, located on the Yamal Peninsula, as well as the implementation of the whole gamut of projects related to Northern Latitudinal Railway. We also want to finish the construction of the railway Kuragina-Kyzyl in the Republic of Tiva in the east of the Russian Federation, and then it will be further connected to the railways of Mongolia, China, and other states of the region. We are going to keep developing these initiatives, which has pan-Eurasian significance, with all the interested partners. We believe that transborder, transnational transport routes are key, which would help to boost our relationships based not only on natural competition, but also on solidarity. Because without political and economic stability in one of the countries through which the route passes, the whole chain would not be functional. That is why we need to naturally support prosperous situation in each other's countries. That is why, led by joint and common progress, together with our partners, we are building the Eurasian Economic Union. This is an organization based on equal rights, pragmatism, and taking into account each other's interests. this union is not a closed market. The Eurasian Economic Union is actively developing its international ties. We have the free trade agreement with Vietnam in place, and just recently we signed such an agreement with Singapore, a temporary agreement on the free trade with Iran as well. We are now holding talks with Israel and Egypt, and soon we will have the first round of negotiations with India. With China, the Eurasian Economic Union has signed an agreement on trade and economic cooperation. We have also launched a program of cooperation between the Eurasian Commission and ASEAN for the 2019 and 2020. All these agreements are important for the formation of the greater Eurasian partnership with the potential participation of the countries of the Eurasian Economic Union, CIS, the SCO, ASEAN, and other states. One of the pillars of the Greater Eurasia is the alignment of the project of the Eurasian Economic Union and China's initiatives One Belt, One Road. We have decided, together with our Chinese colleagues, to revitalize this work. I would like to highlight a very simple and evident thought: building such relationships between states based on pragmatism, taking into account each other's interests. Those are not just well wishes and dreams, not a question of some remote future. It is possible, and we see it implemented today. Dear colleagues, from the outset, Russia is a multinational and multi-religious country. This is account of a civilization of itself, which has organically taken in many traditions and cultures. We have kept its unique nature and unique character. At the same time, we remain united. And this harmony of our own peculiar colors and our common destiny is what we are proud of and what we value. It's evident that diversity within a state is something we should see more often, and this teaches us to be tolerant and patient. The ability to understand and accept various points of view, traditions, and ways of life, but not to enforce your own model as a sort of an axiom that everybody has to follow. I guess that such an experience would be useful to many of our partners. If we talk about the world in general, as all the states are different from each other, the unity and universality are impossible by definition. We need a system within which various values, ideas, and traditions would coexist with each other, would interact and enrich each other. At the same time, they keep and highlight their peculiarities and differences. In the 19th century, when we talked about diplomacy, we had such an image, and we have some good diplomats here among our colleagues. And the Minister of Foreign Affairs told me that today is the day of the Moscow State University, because among my colleagues, the President of Kazakhstan and the President of Azerbaijan are actually graduates of, oh, I'm actually mistaken, I meant MGIMO. They're the graduates of MGIMO, and President Duterte and King of Jordan are the honorary professors of MGIMO. And it is the leading university when it comes to training diplomatic staff. So back in the day, in the 19th century, we talked about the concert of the superpowers. And now we can talk about the global concert of the models of development, interests, cultures, and tradition, where every single instrument is important, irreplaceable, and highly valuable, and so that we would not play out of tune. And so that the music would be harmonious, we need to take into account the opinion and interests of all the participants of international affairs. I would like to reiterate, it is between the autonomous, sovereign states that we can see the establishment of mutually respectful, pragmatic, as well as predictable and solid relationships. Russia honestly adheres to such approaches, and we implement a positive agenda. We strictly adhere and support the adherence to international law, the strengthening of mutual trust and respect. We build our interstate communication on the just and democratic foundation based on the UN Charter. Our country is focused on strengthening security and stability, on combating international terrorism, as well as other challenges and threats, we seek to create the system of equal and indivisible security, including in Asia, which is based on a broad joint work. Just in 3 weeks, Sochi will host the Russia-Africa Summit, and we can suggest a broad agenda to our African colleagues, a broad agenda of equal cooperation which spans across various areas: economy, energy, transport, education, and environment. And in conclusion, I would like to digress a little, but it's also linked to our topic today. Almost 20 years ago, at the turn of the year 2000, an article of mine was released. It was called "Russia at the Turn of the Millennia." The analysis in this article about the prospects of development and the current situation was in line with the reality back in the day. Russia has survived through one of the most difficult periods in its history in the 90s, and it was linked to very acute political, economic, and social crisis. We also faced some aggression on the part of international terrorism. So Russia then approached a very dangerous line. And going beyond this line, we could face the worst that can happen for any country: the full dissolution and disruption of our state. This threat hung in the air, and people could feel it. We could actually go into the depth of a full-scale civil war, to lose our unity and sovereignty, and to be left at the periphery of global affairs. And only thanks to exceptional patriotism, our bravery, the tolerance and laborious nature of Russian people and other peoples of Russia have we moved away from this very dangerous line. Of course, we could do something better over the course of those last 20 years, but we have received this unique experience, and this is highly in demand in the world. And just with our colleagues, we were discussing a very important topic today, the topic of terrorism and combating terrorism. We have a lot of unresolved issues in Russia, but at the same time, thanks to political stability and alignment of the forces of all of people in Russia, we have not only been able to restore our economy and social sector, but also be one of the leading, influential, and most responsible superpowers of the world. And our country is one of the guarantors of the existing world order, and I'm sure that this will be the case in the future. It would be especially efficient if we would work together. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Mr. Putin. And now I pass on the floor to His Majesty, King of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, Abdullah II.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. My dear friend, President Putin, my brothers, presidents of Azerbaijan, of Kazakhstan and Philippines, Your Excellencies, thank you all for this tremendously warm welcome, and I'm delighted to be back in Russia and see so many friends, including my dear friend for almost 20 years, President Putin. Mr. President, you have been a great supporter of the future of my region, and I thank you for your steadfast partnership with Jordan. Indeed, today, Russia's role is pivotal in multiple regions and arenas, in economic, security, and diplomatic matters, and the interfaith relations that are so vital to the future. And that is the unique importance of the Valdai Discussion Club. Your forum has built a world reputation not only for tackling serious global issues, but for opening your doors to Russia's partners. It is a pleasure to join a dialogue here today. My friends, in 2009, Jordan was chosen as the site of Valdai's first ever Middle East conference to discuss issues of the day and the region's future. And that was 10 years ago. And as you know, these past 10 years have brought quite a few new issues to talk about. But some realities are constant. Jordan and Russia continue to share a deep understanding of the need for active, practical collaboration to achieve regional and global peace. Jordan and Russia also remain committed to the core values that bind us all together, and acting on them is the most important weapon we have against extremism and division. And Jordan and Russia continue to seek a peaceful, stable Middle East. My region's strategic complexity defines our challenges, but also our opportunities. We have a role in achieving any positive new world order. This is Jordan's outward vision for inclusive, sustainable growth despite regional turmoil. Our country's stability and moderation and our globally connected, highly motivated young population have helped us build partnerships worldwide. Our partners also share our critical interest in resolving crises in the Middle East, the extremist threat, the Syrian crisis, and above all, the denial of a Palestinian statehood. These are not simply regional issues, they are global. In Syria, ISIS has experienced major defeats. Negotiated ceasefires have brought a significant break in the violence, and Jordan has worked closely alongside Russia, the US, and other international partners to stabilize the situation in southern Syria. We continue to bear a massive refugee burden, alleviating the impact on other regions, but the refugee situation remains costly and dire. The end to this crisis will come only with a political solution, one that preserves Syria's unity, sovereignty, and territorial integrity and enables the safe and voluntary return of refugees. Jordan supports the Geneva process and complementary initiatives, especially the Astana process, in accord with UN resolutions, and results would not be possible without Russia's role. Next, the terrorist threat. Regional victories against the Khawarij, the outlaws of Islam, should not blind us to the long-term and global nature of this challenge. The threat, not just from the Khawarij, but from Islamophobic and racist extremists as well, is a danger to every region. In the Aqaba process and other initiatives, Jordan is working with countries from Asia to Africa to Europe to meet the threat within a holistic approach. And above all, we need to ensure young people have hope. The subject of hope brings me to the core crisis of our region and the world, and that is the denial of a Palestinian state. Jordan and Russia agree on the urgent need for a two-state solution. Our region will not enjoy broad security and stability until the Palestinian-Israeli conflict ends, and that cannot happen without a two-state solution that provides real peace in accord with international law and UN resolutions, an end to the conflict, a viable, independent, sovereign Palestinian state on the June 4th, 1967 lines, with East Jerusalem as its capital, but living side by side with Israel in mutual peace and security. A deep and shared concern for all of us is safeguarding Jerusalem, its holy sites and the historic Muslim and Christian presence in the city. Through the Hashemite custodianship of Islamic and Christian holy sites, Jordan is working to maintain peace and diffuse tensions. But all countries have an obligation to honor the holy city's heritage by making it a unifying city of peace. My friends, after 70 years, it is clear that peace in the Holy Land cannot be achieved by unilateral fiats or violence. It cannot be imposed by land grabs and walls against one's neighbors. It cannot come by flouting international law and equal human rights. And the alternative to a two-state solution is a binational state with an unthinkable, undemocratic regime of unequal laws. We need to take a better, more effective path, and that is something we all have a vital role in delivering. 10 years ago, when Valdai held its first meeting on the Middle East, the theme of the conference was the Middle East 2020. Is a comprehensive settlement possible? And my answer today is yes. Despite all the difficulties, comprehensive peace is possible, and not only possible, but necessary. But it will only happen with your help. Let me wish the Valdai Discussion Club the best of success, and thank you for the leadership on this critical issue of our time. Thank you.
شكرا جزيلا لكم صاحب الجلالة. спасибо. уважаемые коллеги.
Distinguished colleagues, we give the floor to our guests, and we go from the west to the east so that you could understand the principle, how we give the floor to our leaders. Our next presenter is the President of the Republic of Azerbaijan, Mr. Ilham Aliyev. Distinguished President Putin, heads of states, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, allow me to express my deep gratitude to President Putin for the invitation to take part in the meeting of the Valdai Discussion Club. And first of all, let me say that in Azerbaijan, we've been following the activities of the club. It has transformed into one of the most important international platforms where critical issues of today's world are discussed and where recommendations are issued to deepen cooperation. I listened to the presentation by President Putin with great interest. I agree with him about everything. The only thing that he did not mention, as he spoke about the situation in Russia at the threshold of the millennium, the main factor that Russia survived all those ordeals was the factor of Vladimir Putin. It's true, and everyone has to know it. It was thanks to his courage, wisdom, patriotism, Russia was able to survive those ordeals and is now a leading global state. Mr. Putin and I met today. We meet regularly, and even a break of a few months is viewed by us like a pause. The relations between our countries have strategic importance. We call each other strategic partners, and today we discussed a broad agenda of our bilateral relations and planned future cooperation. There's an active political dialogue between our two countries at the level of the heads of states and other officials, and it all contributes to deepening of our cooperation. We interact within international organizations, traditionally supporting each other in most important and critical issues. In June, during the session of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, where they discussed whether Russia should be returned to this organization, the Azerbaijani delegation voted for Russia's returning to Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. I'd like to congratulate our colleagues on that event. There's a positive trend in the development of trade and economic relations between the two countries. Every year we increase our turnover. It's more and more difficult to do every year. Last year was talking about 20% growth. This year it's even more. And as we determine priorities in our cooperation within the framework of 5 roadmaps, will lead to further intensification of trade relations. There are about 700 companies in Azerbaijan, partially owned by Russia, and Azerbaijan invests $1.2 billion into Russia, and Russia invests $4.6 billion into Azerbaijan, and we are a little bit behind here due to objective reasons. Let me also point out that as we industrialize our country, Russian banks help us a lot. That allocated loans of about $1 billion for the projects in the real sectors of our economy. We're also developing our military and technical cooperation. We have agreed on continuing the efforts in that direction, even though the contracts that were signed between us as we purchased Russian equipment were worth $5 billion, including $3 billion that has already been implemented. And as I said, we plan to continue our efforts in that direction. Another important area of our cooperation is transportation. In 2018, using the North-South corridor, we carried 8 times more cargo than in the previous year. The volumes are quite small, but the trend is impressive. Let me also say that the North-West corridor has already started working. The cargo go from Russia through the territory of Azerbaijan, not just to the south, but also to the west, largely thanks to our harmonization of tariff policies, and also thanks to the fact that in Azerbaijan we invested a lot into modern, up-to-date transport infrastructure. There's another indicator of our relations which testifies to the good spirit of relations, not just between our two countries, but between our two peoples. Last year, 880,000 Russians visited Azerbaijan. This time, there are even more of them, and tourists come to look at our sites and try our national cuisine, but also they go to a country where they feel at home, where it's comfortable and safe. I think it's just that particular case which proves the growth of tourism. There are also significant achievements in the area of education. In Azerbaijan, for many years, we have had the Moscow State University branch and also the branch of the First Medical University. In all state-owned universities of Azerbaijan, there are departments that teach in Russian. 25,000 students in our country choose Russian as the language of learning, and over 100,000 school students use Russian language, with over 300 schools with Russian curriculum. Another topic for our discussions is the settlement of Azerbaijan-Armenia conflict in Nagorno Karabakh, and Russia is the co-chair country of the Minsk group of the OSCE for about 25 years, and other 7 territories of Azerbaijan are under Armenian occupation. Nagorno Karabakh, the land of Azerbaijan that has always belonged to our country. During the Soviet time, they created Nagorno Karabakh Autonomous Region, and I have to say, due to the conflict, there is a broad range of opinions. Sometimes they don't reflect the reality. Let me clarify here that in 1921, a decision has been made to leave Nagorno Karabakh as part of Azerbaijan, not to pass it over to Armenia, as Armenian side often interprets it. Before the beginning of the conflict in Nagorno Karabakh Autonomous Region of the Azerbaijan Soviet Socialist Republic, we had population of Azerbaijani and Armenians in a ratio of 25 to 75%. As a result of the conflict, all Azerbaijani population had to leave Nagorno Karabakh and 7 other areas. There was ethnic cleansing, in other words, and today on the occupied territories, there is no Azerbaijani population, and most of the occupied territory is desolated, destroyed land with houses, schools, and public buildings destroyed. As the result of the conflict, Azerbaijan faced a humanitarian disaster. More than 700 refugees from Nagorno Karabakh and 250 Azerbaijani who were thrown out of their historical lands in the territory of modern Armenia. The UN Security Council voted for 4 resolutions, including the resolution that demanded immediate withdrawal of Armenian forces from the occupied territories. For 25 years, they have not been followed, and now we approach a very important issue of implementing the decisions that have been made. The UN Security Council is the highest international body. If for 25 years the decisions made by the Security Council have not been implemented, that raises a lot of questions about the efficiency of this organization. We are concerned by the selective nature of how the resolutions are being implemented. Sometimes it takes a few days. Sometimes they are not even required for certain military activities. In our case, the resolutions remain on paper. The resolution of and settlement of Nagorno-Karabakh, Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict has to be done within the framework of territorial integrity of Azerbaijan, the UN Charter, the Security Council resolution, and the Helsinki Final Act. And I have to say that in recent years, Prime Minister of Armenia has to say that it has to be suitable for the people of Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Nagorno-Karabakh. I also have to say that there is no such notion as the people of Nagorno-Karabakh. We have residents of Nagorno-Karabakh that before the conflict consisted of Azerbaijani and Armenian population having equal rights. As for the which solution is possible, is suitable for Azerbaijan, it is about restoring the territorial integrity of Azerbaijan, recognized by the entire world, return of refugees and displaced people to their own lands, including to Nagorno-Karabakh. That is in line with the UN Security Council resolution and the Helsinki Final Act. I have to say that the military aggression of Armenia against Azerbaijan continues today. Yesterday, an Armenian sniper killed a peaceful resident of the Kazakh district who was far from the conflict area near the border between Armenia and Azerbaijan. I also have to say that during the military provocation in April 2016, 6 peaceful residents of Azerbaijan, including a girl, a child, were killed. I also have to touch upon a statement of Armenian Prime Minister, which generates surprise, not just in Azerbaijan and the Russian Federation, also responded to that within the framework of the Valdai Forum. The declaration, I quote almost verbatim, "Karabakh is part of Armenia and full stop." And that's it. It's a lie, to put it mildly. Karabakh Low or Highland Karabakh has been recognized as an integral part of Azerbaijan. Armenia does not recognize this administrative formation itself. It's a historical Azerbaijani land. That's why Karabakh is Azerbaijan, and exclamation mark. Despite the occupation and humanitarian disaster in the beginning of the 1990s, when every 8th person in our country was a refugee, we have come through a long path of development and construction, with the exception of a few first years of independence when the People's Front was ruling the country. But for the next 26 years, Azerbaijan has been living in the stable situation, and here it's thanks to President Aliyev, who was able to prevent the civil war, stop the occupation, overcome the chaos, and guide Azerbaijan towards constructive building of our economy. And now we live in the situation of stability and development. We strengthen the international positions of our country. One of the indicators of that is the election a few years ago of our country as non-permanent member of the UN Security Council, with 155 countries voting in favor of that decision. It wasn't easy. It took us 3 days and 16 rounds, but justice prevailed. And let me also note that we got significant support in that from the Russian Federation and all other 154 countries. We are glad that the city of Baku has been selected as a place for meetings of highest military command of Russia and NATO. We believe as it is an expression of trust towards us. We believe that this month, at the end of this month in Baku, we will have a summit of non-alignment movement, and Azerbaijan for 3 years will become the chair country of this organization. On top of the international agenda, we focus on international issues connected with economic growth, and we have had some significant achievements in that area in recent years. Azerbaijan has a low foreign debt, and we are number 9. Our foreign debt is 17% of our GDP. For your information, Russia is number 6. We are not competitors, but we always try to look and be guided by the best results. We have done a lot of work to decrease poverty that since 2003 reduced from 49 to only 5%. Only the economic growth allows us to deal with some of our social problems. This year, our minimum wage was increased twice, and the minimal pension was increased by 70%. We invest in modern technologies. Around 80% of our population have access to internet. Azerbaijan is a country with 3 satellites, 2 telecom satellites, and 1 to monitor the Earth's surface. And also, in conclusion, let me also support the idea of Vladimir Putin that transportation projects not only contribute to the increase of trade, but also serve as a bridge between nations. The north-south and west-east projects that pass through our country are contributing to the strengthening of international cooperation and reducing risks. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. And now I'm passing the floor to our next speaker, President of Kazakhstan, Kassym-Jomart Tokayev.
Уважаемые дамы и господа,
Ladies and gentlemen, first and foremost, I would like to express my cordial gratitude to President of the Russian Federation, Mr. Putin, for his kind invitation to such an August meeting. The topic at hand is very close to me because for more than 11 years I had to work in Asia, and sadly I could see the evolution of that big continent. As Kazakhstan is concerned, as probably you know, this is the country in essence and in terms of geography is attributed to Eurasia. The bulk of its territory is located in Asia, but don't forget that 4% of Kazakhstanian territory is located in Europe, and this amounts to about 120,000 square kilometers. We find ourselves at the crossroad of the Islamic, Confucius, and Christian cultures. Golden Horde, Eurasian philosophy are all among our values and cultural code. Such a well-informed and intelligent audience does not need my deliberations on the Asian age. This is a real fact, which is proven by the growth rate in the population, in the GDP, in the industrial output, and in the technological output. Asia is home to 60% of people of the world, It is home to 21 out of 30 major cities in the world. Next year, according to the statistics, half of the middle class on the earth will be people from Asia. Asia accounts for 36% of the global production, compared to 26%, which we marked early in the years 2000. In 2017, 210 out of 500 biggest companies of the world in terms of their revenue were from Asia. Asian companies now are one of the global champions in terms of digital technologies. According to the number of patents received, the Asian countries outpace other regions. As a result, the countries of that continent provide for more than 50% of the GDP growth, thus boosting the international trade and investments. And we have to take advantage of the opportunities which open up. On that way, we did a lot. Back to Kazakhstan. We have certain infrastructure program which is called the Light Way, and it is connected with the BRI from China, let alone that we regard that program as part of the Eurasian Economic Area, and we're working in that sphere, siding with Russia. We position ourselves as a transit and as a commercial bridge between Europe and Asia. Over the last decade, Kazakhstan invested more than $30 billion into the transport infrastructure. We built more than 2,000 kilometers of railways. We have reconstructed 7,000 kilometers of automobile roads. Ports, facilities, and capacity increased to 27 million tons. As a result, Kazakhstan actually is crossed by 5 railway and 6 highway corridors. Until 2025, we plan to invest $20 billion extra into the transportation and logistics hubs. We stand up for the openness of our area for the new viable transport and logistics hubs and solutions. The modern world, apart from selling and extraction of natural resources, adheres major priority to the logistics and transportation services. We intend to get $5 billion revenue due to these services. You know that Kazakhstan is an active participant in a number of Eurasian structures, including the OSCE, SCO, and the meeting on the capacity building in Asia. Every year we hold the summit meeting of the world religions. This is our input into the global dialogue between the religions and civilizations. Our very first president, Nursultan Nazarbayev, initiated the Eurasian integration idea. This year we mark 25th anniversary since it was proposed. Unfortunately, amidst these positive factors, we have and we see the tendencies which cause our anxiety and concern. First of all, in the East we find kind of geopolitical time bombs, many flashpoints. I mean, the Korean Peninsula, the South Chinese Sea, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Palestinian-Israeli conflict, and the situation around Iran, and the confrontation rhetoric, proxy and hybrid wars, the arms race, including the nuclear arms race. These things reach their tipping point, and they are fraught with full-fledged disasters with ramifications for the rest of the world. This situation is a consequence of a shortage of trust and confidence, lack of dialogue between the main stakeholders. This is with concern that we see the rise of the Cold War era, sanctions, mistrust. This is something which undermines the global economy first and foremost. Let us remember that Asia has never been any agreements about the borders. Europe, at the time, they agreed to set up the OSCE, which rests on the permanent status of Berlin and the borders. After that, after reunification of Germany, after disintegration of the USSR, after collapse of Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia, still the OSCE managed to survive. Not only to survive through those processes, but it translated into the OSCE which we know now. After Mongolia acceded to that, the OSCE has become a Eurasian organization next to the SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is also located in Asia. In my opinion, probably you will share this, my opinion, this is an example of successful cooperation and interaction. The secret behind it is that this organization actually is remarkable for trust and confidence, single and unified objectives, and they strive to achieve the goals of the sustainable agenda of that organization. We have to look for efficient formulas to address the fragmentation in Asia. Today, unfortunately, we see a patchwork made of different bilateral alliances, regional and sub-regional institutions. As the Chinese put it, in Asia, they sleep in the same bed, but they see different dreams, have different dreams. As actually the chairman of the Organization for Trust Building, Kazakhstan is ready to boost contacts with other organizations. If the Cold Era confrontation was based on some ideological motives, today they are replaced with more practical formulas under the guise of national interest. This is about promoting interests, and these interests and leverages also are joined by the artificial intelligence, big data, 5G, IoT, etc. The main confrontation area is again located in Asia, and no one actually is acting from the morality standpoints. Sanctions, forex wars are being waged. Sanctions are being imposed. Industrial espionage is being placed there. During the 74th General Assembly of the United Nations, which was dedicated to the Sustainable Development Goals achievement, we discussed the most acute problems of the climate change. The rise of the global temperature results in the melting of the ice and erosion of the soil and desertification. And therefore, actually, we may see the race for the sources of fresh water. This is one of the factors to destabilize the regions, including Asia. In other words, fair and just distribution of the water resources, access to clean water. This, in essence, is one of the challenges to the security of the Central Asian region. In such a difficult situation, Kazakhstan bets on the consistent and concerted activity with certain countries of the region, with international organizations, in order to prevent conflicts in that area. Saying that, we proceed from the sober analysis of our capacity and the international resources. We continue to work to promote the business-like and pragmatic agenda for Central Asia. Central Asia becomes a very important factor for setting up the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Asia. Know that this is the region which has become of interest of the leading countries of the world. And Russia, in that sense, I think, has to play a key role, because historically, Central Asia was part of the Russian Empire. And this is natural that Russia has to be present here in the long term, whether in economic terms or in terms of politics. Kazakhstan intends to constructively work within the Eurasian Economic Union, EAEU. Despite the worsening of the situation, our integration, our union becomes a full-fledged economic organization. Another feature of it is extending the network of partnership of the economic union from Singapore to Serbia. Kazakhstan is a champion of honest mediatorship in settling down regional conflicts. For instance, within the Astana process, we had 13 rounds of inter-Syrian negotiations, and the positive role of Russia there is totally undoubtful. The situation in Syria is another feature which attests to the worsening situation in the Middle East. That's why, speaking from the rostrum of the United Nations, I said that we have to promote efficient solutions to this situation. We adhere close attention to Afghanistan. The situation there in the latest months, unfortunately, has worsened, has exacerbated. We hope that inter-Afghani process, with the support of all the stakeholders, will bring long-awaited peace to that country. Kazakhstan has always been a consistent champion of preventive diplomacy and disarmament. A positive role can be played by the Conference on Interaction and Confidence Building in Central Asia, or SCICA, which proved to be a platform to develop collective approaches to addressing the security issues. I believe that this is high time. The moment is opportune to think about and to discuss the problem, how this forum can translate into an organization. Achieving peace free from nuclear arms is the key priority of my country's foreign policy. We have fared quite a long road in terms of non-proliferation and disarmament, and we seek to continue this work. It is very well known that the risks of modernity are intertwined, and without a comprehensive approach to the multifaceted challenges to the security, the Asian miracle may translate into the colossus on feet of clay. Without collective efforts, instead of the Asian age of flourishing, we can get the dire time or troubled time of Asia. Setting up the security architecture in Asia is not possible without close cooperation with the West. Kazakhstan has always proposed to set up cooperation between CICA and the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe in order to achieve our common goals. The main element of our common work in the region could be the struggle against terrorism, extremism, organized crimes, illegal migration, and drug trafficking. The creative agenda can include the development of the human capital, implementation of the best practices in terms of the public administration, increasing our capacity and rational use of the water resources. And finally, to conclude my remarks, I would like to say a few words about Russia. Russia, in my opinion, is a great nation. No one can deny the fact that in the modern world, without pragmatic role of Russia, no key problem, whether this is a global problem or a regional problem, can be addressed. And certainly, the credit for that goes to Mr. Putin, President of the Russian Federation. Today, we held bilateral negotiations. So we reiterated our wish to develop our relations in the spirit of strategic partnership and alliance. I can assure you that Kazakhstan will consistently fulfill its commitments, its obligations, in compliance with the bilateral agreements and in compliance with the agreements which we have signed within the integration process. So thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much. And now, let me give the floor to our final speaker of today, President of the Republic of the Philippines, Mr. Rodrigo Duterte.
President Putin, the heads of states, the Valdai Discussion Club, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. For over 2 decades after the end of the Cold War, Philippine foreign policy hardly evolved. Russia, for instance, remained on the margins of our diplomacy. I view this as an oversight of strategic proportion, a result of bureaucratic inertia, a symptom of blind attachment to bygone views and assumptions, and a massive failure to grasp change and seize new opportunities. The Filipino nation, of course, deserved better. Thus, when I assumed the presidency in 2016, I vowed to correct this. In 2017, I visited Russia for the first time. Although it was cut short, I believe it led to meaningful and historic developments in our relations. When I say it was cut short, I had to go home because the Marawi, a city in Mindanao in the Philippines, was brewing, evolving into an endless violence. We intend to stay in this path, and that is why I'm very glad to be here for the second time. I thank President Putin for the opportunity to reaffirm our commitment to a robust and comprehensive Philippine-Russia partnership. I am also grateful to the Valdai Discussion Club for this honor to speak before you on a topic of great importance to us, that of an order and change in world politics. I'm talking about fairness and equality and a stable global order. The liberal global order built after the Second World War was the Pax Americana, appears to be under challenge. As the 21st century unfolds, the legitimacy of this order is increasingly questioned, its appeal weakened, and its hold over countries diminished. I see 2 key factors that could be explained this situation. First is the combination of exceptionalism and double standards that we have seen and time again and again from the beginning of the very vanguards of this current order. The great Russian novelist Lev Tolstoy wrote, "All happy families are all alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy." In its own way, this is the same line for nations. Developing countries like the Philippines, with their own histories, face different challenges and inner problems that would require different sets of solutions. Yet some so-called friends act like they know the answers to our problems and impervious to our specific socio-economic and political conditions. They create rules and norms for almost everyone, and some refuse to be bound by the same. Think of the UNCLOS, the Paris Agreement on Climate Change, and even the Convention of the Rights of the Child. They weaponize human rights, oblivious to its damaging consequences to the very people they seek to protect. Just look at the chaos and instability that ensued in Libya and Iraq following military interventions. Closer home, some of our partners have heard unfair criticism against my government about perceived excesses in our fight against drugs. They see what they want to see to justify their preconceived notions and are trying to understand that what truly is happening is there in my country. Is this how friends treat each other? We have not seen them backtrack from defense contracts over baseless apprehensions that we would use arms to violate human rights. Yet you see the same countries supplying high-end weaponry to parties whose actual human rights records leave so much to be desired. But we only seek to protect our republic and those who wish to tear it apart. We only seek to curb criminality that corrodes the very structure of government. We only seek to build a credible defense against those who might be tempted to violate our territorial integrity. Is this not something that all nations are entitled to? Is this not what democratically elected governments are mandated to do? By their acts, they weaken my government's ability to protect law-abiding citizens from the outlaws. They limit our capacity to stop the vicious cycle of internal conflict and underdevelopment. And they clip our wings, making it more difficult for us to effect meaningful change for our people. Now, let me ask you this. In what universe is this right justifiable or fair? Nowhere in the self-contained bubbles of some societies that had the luxury of developing first. We are tired of the misguided and self-serving crusades of the few. It is time that they are challenged. Let me be very clear. I am not against the United States or the West. The U.S. is a close friend of the Philippines. In fact, our only treaty ally. We have deep ties with the American people, forged by shared history and nourished by common values. America certainly can offer so much, more than the world. Let me stress, I am not against liberalism in politics and in the economy. Liberalism, to my mind, creates the best pathways to a just and fair society. For a thriving democracy like the Philippines, there is simply no other better alternative to a philosophy that puts premium on the freedom and dignity of the individual. Our issue is not the current global order, but rather the actions of certain actors that violate the very principles that underpin this order. The Philippines does not ask for a special treatment, nor favors from its partners. It does not seek exemption from the norms and principles that have kept the peace in our world for decades. What we seek, I assume, what the Russian people and all nations also desire, is fairness, equality, and mutual respect. We want a strengthened rules-based order where countries, big or small, are treated the same. We want unimpeded freedom and guaranteed by our Constitution to exercise our right to govern ourselves as a people and as we saw it fit. And we want friends and partners to respect our independence to make sovereign decisions just as we respect theirs. The principles of respect of state sovereignty, non-intervention, the peaceful resolution of disputes must be upheld at all times. Otherwise, the order unravels. This is crucial, especially now, with the rise of new powers and the relative decline of the old. The geopolitical shift is the second challenge of the current global order. In the remaining 3 years of my term, we likewise expand the horizon of Philippine diplomacy by deepening our engagement in Latin America, Africa, and Central Asia. It is also high time that the Philippines book and look at the Middle East with fresh eyes going beyond oil and overseas Filipino workers. As one of the fastest growing economies in the world, the Philippines will assume our twin responsibility of sustaining the growth of our people while helping other developing countries in their own to progress. We will strengthen our economic ties with those regions, opening new markets, and with it the free exchange of ideas, technology, and innovation. For I want the Filipino people to broaden their worldwide view, to be enriched by the cultures and intellectual traditions and civilizations of the Americas, Africa, Central Asia, and the Middle East. Indeed, parochialism and isolationism have no place in the world that is getting smaller and smaller by the day. We have to embrace our shared destiny if we are to overcome the existential challenges of our time. But make no mistake, while we recognize independence of nations, we hold firstly sacrosanct our own independence. Openness to cooperation without precondition is the answer to the serious threats we face today, from terrorism to climate change, from migration issues to refugee crisis, and from new pandemics to looming shortages of vital resources. These are multi-dimensional problems that cut across issues of national identity, human rights, development, and sovereignty. Clearly, we have no choice. We have to act together to survive and prosper together. So instead of using these issues as tools to maintain the status quo, to make the rich richer and the poor poorer, as some wealthy nations are wont to do, we have to help each other. If we pursue genuine cooperation, we need to choose between sustaining development and protecting environment, between promoting diversity and maintaining national identities, or between upholding human rights and preserving local social order. Balancing this seemingly contradictory goal is the fundamental challenge of our times. In this context, our United Nations must step up and reinvigorate global efforts toward creative solutions commensurate to the complexity of our local problems. But it must do some while upholding the principles and ideals that all nations, not only individuals, hold dear. This is also the opportune time for us in the global south, those who choose to be non-aligned, to ensure that we remain relevant. More than making our voices heard on issues that deeply affect, we must act together. Your Majesty, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we have a stake in a stable global order. In this period of flux, it is important that we expand our notion of ourselves to include others, that we choose the enduring power of persuasion over coercion, that we follow the path of peace in order to achieve our shared and noble aspirations of our people. We only wish peace for all mankind. Thank you.
Ginoong Pangulo, maraming salamat po. А теперь разрешите.
And now, if you don't mind, I'm going to move on to the questions, and I'll be the first, if you don't mind. President Putin, you have given a bright overview of the successes Russia has achieved in fighting terrorism in Syria. The war is all but over. The situation is stabilizing, but what do we do next with the Syrian issue? Well, we've responded to this question on many occasions, as well as to similar questions. What we need to do is as follows. Yes, indeed, the war, the hostilities of large scale have been brought to an end, even though local hotbeds still persist. And whatever the result achieved through hostilities, a final decision is still not within our grasp unless we embark upon the political path of settlement. And that is indeed the path we are pursuing. We are trying to create conditions to address the root causes of the conflict via political means. We have done a lot to set up a constitutional committee. The idea for it was born incidentally here in Sochi at a large-scale event attended by representatives of the government and almost all opposition forces back then. The Syrians themselves agreed to set up a constitutional committee either to adopt a new constitution or to make amendments to the current one. Subsequently, it took quite a long time to shape the committee, to bring it together. We, as well as our Iranian and Turkish partners, have exerted a lot of efforts to finally see this constitutional committee happen, and right now we're waiting for it to begin its work under the aegis of the United Nations. Thank you. And right now a question to His Majesty King Abdullah. Your Majesty, you are a direct descendant through the male line, the 42nd generation of Prophet Muhammad. What do you think about the issue of international terrorism and extremism, given the fact that extremists are often using the name of Prophet Muhammad as a guise, claiming that they are fighting to put his ideas into life? What can you say about that?
Well, I think I've been on record by saying that the challenge that we've had is this is sort of a third world war by other means, and this is a challenge that is going to take the next decade or so to overcome. And this is one that actually brings us all together. Not only is there, in a way, a civil war inside Islam against the Khawarij, the outlaws of Islam, but what binds us together in this global challenge It's not just Syria or Iraq. We're having challenges in Libya, Boko Haram, Shabab. We're working very closely with our friends in the Philippines, counter-radicalization in Europe, the Balkans. These are issues that have to be done where all religions come together. And to quote what binds the monotheistic faces together is to love thy God and love thy neighbor, something that I know that President Putin and I have discussed for many, many years, of how do we come together as religions and nations to fight this scourge. As I alluded to in the speech, also we have a challenge, obviously, of Islamophobia, which is a threat to all of us. Sensible minds around the world know that we need to come together and build on the common ground between all of us. And so my concern on these issues is, can we take this fight globally united is, I think, the challenge that we have to do. And I still think that a lot of the world does not understand what the threat is, and that is problematic for all of us. And lastly, Jerusalem, as I alluded to, Jerusalem for Christians, Muslims, and Jews is a city that should unify us all together as a symbol of the challenge that we have over the next decade or so. And I am very gratified to the role that Russia has played, and the President specifically, in strengthening the relationship between Christianity and Islam, but also protecting Christians that have been under fire inside of the Middle East, and the strong role that not only the President and Russia plays in the future of Jerusalem, but also the Russian Orthodox Church, which is an important element of us coming all together.
Thank you. Next question goes to President Aliyev. Integration projects in the economic field with the participation of our countries, in particular the trade route north-south, as well as the transportation corridor from west to north that you have mentioned, all of that creates unique conditions for setting up a collective security system. From Baku, what is your perspective on such a potential system? And to what extent is it facilitated by Azeri-Russian relations and ties? Of course, these issues are intertwined. In my comments, in my remarks, I mentioned that transport projects not only create possibilities, opportunities for cargo senders or additional revenues for transit countries. No, these projects also create interdependence. Any transit country has to have good relations with its neighbors. Otherwise, the transit will not happen, pure and simple. As for Azerbaijan, for long now, we've been investing in setting up a modern transportation infrastructure. We've been investing into fostering an atmosphere of trust in our region. And I think through common efforts of the partner countries, we've managed to create a unique format for cooperation, which, as of now, serves the interests of raising the prosperity of our nations as well as reinforcing security. Interdependence, complementarity, in international affairs are important factors contributing to security and stability. Azerbaijan has been investing a lot of money into transportation infrastructure. We have commissioned a very big trade port not far from Baku. We've got railways that are connecting us to 3 neighboring countries. We've got automobile highways that are also boosting the freight. Our geographic position is certainly dependent upon the geopolitics. It can be either advantageous or disadvantageous. And I believe that the goal of each and every government is to put a positive spin upon its geographic location. I think we've managed to do just that. We are part of the project One Belt, One Road. Azerbaijan is the only country in the South Caucasus that participated in the conference of the One Belt, One Road initiative in Beijing. We're also part of the North-South corridor. Azerbaijan is the only country that is participating both in the North-South corridor and in the North-West corridor. The latter is already working, as I mentioned. Of course, these projects are going to contribute to greater regional security. As for the second part of your question, how do Russian-Azeri ties contribute to greater security? I think suffice it to look at our region that we managed to remove chaos, civil wars, religious extremism. Azerbaijan and Russia are countries with a stable internal political situation. These are countries that are working closely with one another, in particular in the fight against international terrorism and extremism. Both Russia and Azerbaijan are also countries of the Caucasus. The Caucasus brings us together, as well as the Caspian Sea. And I've got to point out that an important role in reinforcing security and cooperation has been played by the signing of the convention regulating the legal status of the Caspian Sea in Tower. That was signed last year. So our countries are not just bilateral, they're also an important factor of stability in the region as a whole. Thank you. My next question goes to President Tokayev. Your country is between two big powers, Russia and China. You have mentioned, in particular, your participation in the process of linking together these projects with the One Belt, One Road initiative. You've mentioned the active role you are playing in developing the Eurasian integration. So at the same time, you are participating in projects promoted by both China and Russia. How do you manage to harmonize your relations with these two countries? Well, this is a natural process. As you have pointed out, Kazakhstan is located between two biggest Eurasian countries. It's 1,700 kilometers of border with China, and with Russia we've got the longest land border in the world. So thanks to our infrastructure project, as well as thanks to the Chinese mega project of One Belt, One Road, as well as thanks to the efforts of the Russian Federation that has development programs of its own, give us the opportunity to talk not just about a harmonization, but also a synergy of these projects. All of this is beneficial to Kazakhstan, because without our country's participation, as a matter of fact, the Chinese mega project of the new Silk Road is impracticable. It cannot be implemented. So it's quite comprehensible. It's no coincidence that President Xi Jinping first publicly floated the concept of the new Silk Road in Kazakhstan back in 2013. We believe that this concept, should it be linked and synergized in a beneficial manner to our country. I cited some statistics too. In 2018, we've got additional 3 billion in revenue in our budget, and we look forward to increasing the revenue from our participation in this mega project. On the whole, in the modern world, the production and the sale of natural resources held an important place. But in the near future, it is quite possible that in terms of revenue, it is transportation and logistics that are going to move to the foreground. They are going to generate prosperity of countries, because transportation and logistics will help boost industrial production and, most importantly, SMEs of the countries involved in such projects. That is why Kazakhstan is going to continue to boost efforts to participate in these projects. And as for the Eurasian Economic Union, in my remarks, I also pointed out the importance of this Eurasian Integration Association, which naturally links together with the concept of the new Silk Road. Thank you. And finally, my last question goes to President Duterte. Mr. President, you have mentioned that the US is your traditional ally. At the same time, as we can see, your country has drastically reshaped its foreign policy. It used to be unilaterally oriented towards the US, and right now your foreign policy is multilateral, multi-vector, and Russia holds an important place in that regard. You've also managed to improve and reinforce your relations with China. How did you do that?
Well, in the first place, we have been a colony of Spain then with the United States. Altogether, Spain had about 300 years and 50 years under the yoke of imperialism by the United States. It's all water under the bridge. And we have been prepared to do the governance that we decide. Over the years, I have seen that the foreign policy of the Philippines always tailored that of the United States. And we can hardly go to some, at that time, communist countries just to explore trade and commerce. It was looked upon by the American government as not a pleasant one, not a new development that would make them happy. And during my time, I was at a loss where to go. I didn't have contacts. I was not really expected to win the presidency. As a matter of fact, during the last week of the elections, I was in the number 4. But the week before the elections, my rating shot up to 32, and so I won by a landslide. Now I wanted something more than just what a new country can give us. And even in the purchase of arms and the things that they have given us, some were good, some were bad. And products, air assets that were given to us were refurbished from NATO and given to us. And a week after, 3 of those we bought from them crashed, killing all my pilots and crew, 6 helicopters. And that was the time that I was also criticized heavily by the human rights of the United States Congress. And then, to my surprise, even in the Human Rights Commission. You know, during the time of 2 presidents ago, we were told by the United States itself that if we do not take care, if we do not watch out, our country will be swallowed by drugs. And it came to pass with about 2 presidents. And we saw mayors, city mayors, and the chairman of the most basic unit of government, 50,000 into drugs. And when I took over, I found out that 9 generals will involve in the trafficking of drugs. I said, I'm not only fighting corruption from the inside of government. I was fighting corruption and the trafficking of drugs, even in my government. And that is why I had to do something very fast. And now people say that my pronouncements actually encourage everybody to kill the drug lords and drug addicts. You know, frankly, I would be happy to if that things happen. And I enunciated the rule when I became president. And that was also the same rule when I was mayor for 21 years in a city. And I said that I'm going to build a comfortable city, a safe city, a city where you can walk. And I asked the police, ask your wife and children to walk the streets at night. If they come home unmolested, unbridled by worries, not victims of mugging and crimes, because there were so many addicts on the streets. And I said, I want that kind of environment. Then I proceeded. This I would pose to the entire community of the world. Is it wrong for a president to say that do not destroy my country, especially the children, because I will kill you? And that was my order to the armed forces and to the police. And right now, even as I fly here and go back, there are about, again, 2 generals who are still playing with drugs. And I said, well, I told you, do not destroy my country because it is being flooded with drugs. With so many families created and become dysfunctional. You only have to have one addict in the family and the entire family collapses, becomes a socially disorganized unit. And I had to act fast. And the human rights are accusing me of murdering 70, now it's 20, now it's 7. So let me explain. These human rights guys are very eager to see a dead carcass of a criminal, a drug lord, a city mayor. And they would question me, why was he killed? Despite of the evidence of drugs all over the house. And one house of a certain mayor that was killed had paper walls stick with 500 pesos. It was made as a wall of the house inside. And so I said, well, I've warned you, do not do it, because I will kill you. But I also ordered the military and the police, go out and dismantle the organized crime of drug trafficking. And if you find your life in danger, I will order you to shoot them. Rather see a policeman or a soldier dead. In Marawi rebellion, it started with a drug case. And so it was rebellion because almost everybody of that place, which was really the laboratory of the entire Philippines, where drug was produced and people had money, can see no business there except the stores. And yet, there was one in another city, he had 100 cars, 2 Lamborghinis and so many Porsches. And yet, the human rights would still insist on a wrong committed by me. So I'm telling them, I'm sorry. But if there is something, I told you, you dismantle. And if in the process you kill. And I said to the world, and to the United Nations, and to everybody, I take responsibility for all of the consequences of this drug war. I and I alone. If somebody has to be hanged, I will be happy. I will even put the noose on my neck and say, go ahead. Or if you want to shoot me in a firing squad, fine. Our national hero died before a firing squad. That would be an honor for me to be the same in this situation. But I do not aspire for honor. I do not aspire to be known. I'm just a citizen, a worker of government. And I will do what I have to do to protect the people, especially the next generation. And that is what I have been known. They are always threatening me with bringing me to the... that would be the day. We have courts in my country. The judges are independent. The prosecutors do not talk to me. And so I said, if there is somebody who will answer for this, I will, but you have to do your job. And I have fired so many prosecutors and judges because corruption was eroding the very foundation of government. And I said came up with this statement. Little did I know that I will not only be fighting the criminals, the drug lords, the kidnappers. I was fighting men in my own government and the corruption that drugs bring. Drugs cannot prosper, I tell you, unless the military and the police would allow it. If the city mayor in my city, if I say do not do it, and if you have been to the Philippines, do not look at the carcass of the criminals. You get nothing. But look at the many thousands of families that are socially dysfunctional because of. If you want to destroy your enemy, feed one of his children with drugs, and your dog, the family goes kaput. I am faced with the job of the human rights, the criminals. I have no business. I have no universal right to destroy a fellow human being. I do not allow the military to shoot a person hog-tied or with a stretched hand in surrender. I told them that the only way that you can kill a criminal, the drug lords and the addicts, is when your life is in danger. So shoot first before you die. Because if I go to the scene of the crime and I see that you are the one dying, I will kick you and finish you off for being stupid. Do not allow government to be weakened by such. You have to impose order. And so that is what really bugs me. So the government of the United States, before the, if I could only have 2 minutes. If I can have 2 minutes, then I'll tell you what. The rifles, we have the longest insurgency problem, communist insurgency problem, armed struggle. It has killed so many of my soldiers. And the rifles were, it has fired so many rounds, it becomes loosened. There is no more rifling. It comes out turning at a very fast rate so that it has own velocity. It can hit the target. Yeah. And I tried to buy about 24,000 M16s for my police and military. One congressman in the US or two stood up and said, do not give it to the Philippines, especially to the mayor, because he will use those rifles to kill his own Filipino citizen. And that is really funny. And I would ask US Congress, kindly educate yourself first. You have the CIA. Yeah, they're around, even here right now. CIA is listening to us. I am sure they're getting the message up there with their, kindly be kind to your fellow men. Before you condemn, investigate. And allow us, before you come up with this result, allow us the right to be heard. It is a God-given right to any person. Whether you live in autocracy or a tyranny, every person has the right to be heard. And human rights. The United States did not send me. They stopped the rifles at the time when the rebellion in Marawi was brewing. I was here, scheduled to have a series of meetings about trade and commerce. But on the day, I just stayed there for 6 hours. And I'm thankful that President Putin came all the way from somewhere to fly just to be in Moscow to talk to him before I took off. Took us about 5 months to quell the rebellion. And it was only when China and Russia gave us the very well-made guns. The new fighting now is from afar. You don't need to go to your enemy, you just paste him at the crossroad. It can hit somebody 2 miles, 2 kilometers away. And those rifles that were that good, if your sniper has been trained properly. That was our advantage, and that is our story. I tried to buy helicopters, and I was looking around South Korea and Russia and Israel. They said, no, you cannot buy. You buy from us. So Bell Helicopter of Canada offered me 10, but with a condition that I cannot use it against my own citizens. I said, look, stupid. I am buying these helicopters because they are killing the people, the rebels, and my military men, and my police. And you sell me a helicopter with the condition that I cannot place armaments, only for transport of dead soldiers. So, wounded soldiers, and for humanitarian reasons. When as a matter of fact, these rebels are rebelling because they want to oust the government. ISIS is there. We're having a hard time fighting terrorism. They blow churches, so many. They blow military camps. The suicide bombers are not from there, but white-looking. Now, I really don't know their nationalities. We do not know because we can only recover bits and pieces of their bodies.
Mr. President, I'm very sorry. I have a reputation in the Valdai Club to be very unpolite. So I'm sorry I'm intervening, but maybe we go ahead and then come back to you.
Yes. Well, yes. Still 1 minute. I will end up by saying that, well, this has been the issue in the Philippines, that they have a president who's a murderer. I assure you. I have a religion, and they say that, well, the bishops and all of this, they've been attacking me. And I said, your religion is not. I have my own God. And I'm planning to invite the Russian Orthodox. The missionaries come to the Philippines so that we can look for a place where we can build the Orthodox Church. It was built many years ago by the Russians, 1922. This was destroyed. It's an old dilapidated.
Please excuse me, Mr. President, this 1 minute is still there? Or?
Yes. I'm now involved in freedom of religion. So, well, I must end by this, just abusing the minds of people. I am not a killer. Some say, killer of what? Maybe, you know what it is. You are all practicing it. Killing girls, maybe? woman. We are good at that. I have yet to kill one human being. When I say I will kill you, well, that's a statement coming from the mouth of the president.
Okay.
Still have half a minute, I will forgo it.
Probably after we have questions from the hall.
Yes.
Probably next thing we'll think
Oh, I
about.
forgot
Okay.
about it. Yes, and I'd be happy to respond to any.
Спасибо. А теперь перейдем к вопросам из зала.
Thank you very much. Now moving on to the questions from the audience. Who would like to ask a question?
Говорите, кому вы задаете вопрос?
Please tell us whom your question is addressed to and introduce yourself. I see many hands, but I guess Dr. Mandan from India was the first one.
My name is Nandan Unikrishnan. I'm from India. And thank you for allowing me to ask the question. My first question is to President Putin. Vladimir Vladimirovич, мир проходит через очень большие проблемы.
Mr. President, the world is facing major issues after the end of the unipolar world. And during this transit process to the new global order, we have new concepts arising: Eurasia, Greater Eurasia, and others. And there is one concept that covers the Indian and the Pacific Ocean. It's called the Indo-Pacific concept. Many say that this concept was developed by the United States in order to contain China.
Хотя индийский премьер Нарендра Моди недавно
Although Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi recently said that it's not the case, and the concept is indeed Indian. And Indo-Pacific concept is an open system, and many countries can get to be a part of it. What is your opinion on that?
Well, as you can see, there are different interpretations given to this concept. Can I tell you about our concept? Our concept consists in not building new blocks as it was done in Europe or in the North Atlantic after the Second World War. As of now, in Asia, I believe the central organization that exists there is ASEAN. And the structure of different organizations and different platforms is organized around this central organization, its core being ASEAN. There are different formats, ASEAN +1, and so on and so forth. There is also ADMM, and other formats. So if it continues to be a whole network of different organizations, if these organizations continue to work with one another, then it can be called whatever you like. But if an attempt is made to create some block structures, I believe then it's going to be absurd, it's going to be nonsense for Asia, and in particular for its current condition, current landscape. And moreover, this attempt is hardly ever going to be successful. I know the attitude and the sentiment of many friends of ours in Asia. They don't want to enter any blocks against anyone. What they want is kind of a network for cooperation in different dimensions. And as I mentioned in my remarks today, they want to take the interests of one another to account, to find compromise, and based on that to move forward. They don't want to be involved in confrontation of any country against any country, nor do they want to participate in blocks. That's the first thing. And the second one, the second part of your question related to attempts at containing China, I think these attempts are bound to fail. They are simply impossible. And if there is anyone who undertakes such an attempt, then they are going to understand it's impossible sooner or later. But trying to achieve that, they're going to hurt themselves. Well, that's the scenario. I think that can happen, but it's going to be destructive and harmful. If, however, we join our efforts together to create an atmosphere of cooperation a spirit of trying to create a collective security system, then it's going to be beneficial, especially with one of the countries which is very close to us in Asia and in the world, and that is India. So on the other side of the audience, I think there was Mr. Aliyev who wanted to ask a question, and then we can give the mic to someone.
Давайте вам потом, хорошо, готовьтесь.
Hello, this is Abdullah. I would like to address my question to Mr. President Putin. In your speech, the Gulf security and the Syrian settlement feature prominently. And recently, Russia also advanced the framework for the collective security in the Gulf. Bearing in mind that, the root cause of the Gulf insecurity, one of the major root causes of the Gulf insecurity is the Iran-Saudi rivalry, how Russia is planning to address this question, particularly given the fact that recently many of such attempts, a second track one, has failed? And related to this, are you envisioning any interconnection between the reduction of tension in the Gulf and the Syrian settlement? Thank you.
Well, let me begin with the second part of your question. Yes, there is an interconnection, because the confrontation between the biggest countries in the region, the most influential ones, this confrontation cannot but have an impact upon the whole range of the situation, the whole system in this region, in particular the situation in Syria. I'm aware that the leadership of Saudi Arabia, which I'm going to visit in the near future, as well as the leadership of Iran, we're in constant contact with our Iranian counterparts. Just recently, I've seen the president of Iran. I believe all of them want what's good. They want peace for the Syrian people. And inspired by this lofty ideal, I'm hopeful they're going to do everything in their power so as not to use the territory of Syria as a battlefield. And I'm also hopeful that if this realization strikes, if our partners act just like that, then we'll see that apart from confrontation, there is also room for cooperation for the sake of achieving common goals. Apart from that, I believe there are other factors that would change the situation, the dynamics between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and transition from confrontation to cooperation. Because both countries are often faced with common threats such as radicalism, separatism, and terrorism. There are common goals. First and foremost, development goals. And you asked me, how do we plan to address these differences? We cannot address them. It's up to our friends in Saudi Arabia and Iran to address. What we can do is facilitate this process, create a favorable environment for that, and come up with different options for a solution. But it is up to Saudi Arabia and Iran themselves to make the decision how to settle that, how to address that. Thank you. Yes, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Naumkin. And I have one question to President Putin. I came from the East, and my question is relating to what my Indian colleague mentioned. Prime Minister Abe has been presenting Japanese concept of free and open Indo-Pacific strategy, and the essence of the strategy is the idea of connectivity. That's why I'm very glad to hear that President Putin, you mentioned about connectivity in your speech. So Japanese approach is much more focusing on economic connectivity, slightly different from American approach. And Russia has been a major player in the Pacific, and Russia has been enhancing its tie with India. So it's natural that we are welcoming and waiting for Russian Indo-Pacific strategy. Already, France and the United States, EU, has already presented its own version of Indo-Pacific strategy. So can we share your vision of Russian Indo-Pacific strategy? Thank you.
Вы говорите, даже Франция...
Well, you've said even France came up with such Indo-Pacific. Why are you saying even France? It's a great power. It's a permanent member of the UN Security Council. It's a global power. It always comes up with global solutions to global problems. So there is no surprise here that it has come up with such a strategy. Now, as for Russia, just have a look. Japan comes up with an Indo-Pacific development strategy. Russia and a number of other countries are actively promoting their contacts and ties within the framework of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization that has proved its worth. Even though it started with very simple tasks that it first sought to address, it meant to achieve the demarcation of the border at first, and we moved beyond that, and there are new members and there are others who want to join in. Here, it has already been mentioned, it has already been said about the Eurasian Economic Union and the One Belt, One Road initiative put forth by China. All of these initiatives, these ideas are very close in terms of their spirit, and they are compatible. I believe if we bundle the efforts of different associations that already exist together, if we bring together this concept, if we set up a network structure for cooperation, bringing together these structures, then we are going to arrive at something I've already mentioned, a greater Eurasian partnership. Whether this partnership has to be institutionalized in the nearest future, I don't know. Maybe not in the nearest future, but still it can be an informal framework for cooperation. And afterwards, we can think about common conduct and organizational cooperation. If we aspire to achieve such democratic cooperation and interaction with due regard for the interests and respect for one another, for our interests and special characteristics, then we'll achieve the development we all want to secure. I've jotted down a great number of names already, so please do not take offense if I cannot give the floor to everyone. But first, I'd like to give the floor to Sergei Luzyanin. He comes next in my list that I've jotted down. Sergei Luzyanin, the Russian Far East Institute of the Russian Academy of Sciences. President Putin, we all know that this is an anniversary. This year we're celebrating. It's the 75th anniversary since the establishment of the People's Republic of China, 70th year anniversary since the establishment of diplomatic ties. Here we congratulated our Chinese partners and colleagues here at the Valdai Club, and the cooperation has reached a great level. So my question is, what is already being done in our partnership to the benefit, and where else is there untapped potential? Are there any spheres where we have not yet achieved the level of cooperation we want? So what are the successes and what are the prospects? As for the successes, they are obvious. First, we've managed to achieve an unprecedentedly high level of trust. These are relationships of alliance. In the full sense of the word, strategic partnership. This certainly has a bearing upon our economy. At an advanced pace, we are increasing our trade. And as you know, last year, it hit the target of $108 billion. And right now, we're going to aspire to 200. The structure of our trade is diversifying. Yes, 70% of Russia's exports are energy sources, but it's only natural. We've got the products, and China needs these products. This doesn't mean that we are not doing other things, that we're not pursuing other avenues of economic cooperation. We've already constructed 4 units of a power plant. It's a high technology project, and we're working on another 4 units. This is a great deal of work. We're also working on a wide-body, long-haul aircraft, on heavy helicopter, and these projects are going to be completed. I do not doubt that. We're working together in space, in agriculture. We cannot even satisfy the Chinese demands in soybeans. They want to buy as much as we can produce. That is where we are underperforming. We can do even more. We can make money on that. But our agrarians simply cannot do that because they do not grow as much soybeans as China is willing to acquire. And we do not have the necessary investment yet. So we are going to continue our cooperation in space exploration and military and technical cooperation. I do not think I'm going to open a secret if I say that we are assisting our Chinese partners in setting up a system for the prevention of a missile attack. And this is a very serious matter. It is going to propel the combat readiness, the defensive capabilities of China to a whole new level. These systems currently are only available to Russia and the US. We are working closely and deeply on humanitarian cooperation. I'm not going to name all areas we are working in. Our regional cooperation is also at a very high level. I'm not even talking about the infrastructure, joint infrastructure we are developing together, but the border provinces of China and the adjacent Russian regions are working with one another very actively, very successfully. So there is a whole range of avenues for cooperation, but there's something I'd like to highlight. We've never been friends. We've never worked together against anyone. We're always working in the interest of one another in a positive manner.
I would like to help you with your work a little. So when we were preparing, we understood that we would have more questions than we can afford to have. So we have collected some questions and grouped them. So I'm going to ask them to save some time. You've talked a lot about it, but apparently people still want you to. Over the last year, we've seen a number of events when it comes to nuclear stability. And they were different kind of events. For example, the United States withdrew from the INF treaty, and Russia was blamed for this. And then John Bolton, who was the main proponent for this withdrawal, he actually lost his job. And apparently by this, President Trump made a certain point. So discussions of New START treaty are going into God knows what direction. And we talked about it last year, and you said that if nuclear aggression is to happen, the aggressors would die and we will go to heaven. Are we closer to heaven this year? We are at the same distance to God at all times, and God will decide as to where we would go after we will end our presence here on Earth. The situation has not become any better, though. The situation has worsened due to the US withdrawal from the INF treaty. It's evident for everybody, so now we're waiting for them to take their next step. The fact that very soon after their withdrawal from the treaty, the United States actually tested an intermediate-range missile is testimony to the fact that they have been working on it for a long time. In such a short period, it's impossible to do this, so they've been working on it for several years. So they were trying to find a pretext in order to withdraw from the city, and I guess this is not a very good pretext because they have no grounds to accuse Russia of any breaches. They told us that Aegis systems could not be used for launches of land-based intermediate-range missiles, and in Aegis they have them in Romania, and then soon we'll have those systems in Poland. Then they said that those Aegis systems were used for launching such missiles. Maybe they should have had a longer pause between those two actions. They were trying to fool us, and then they actually confessed to this. In any case, the situation has not gotten any better. When we had this escalation, we said that we are going to do the same thing, but we would like to say that we are not going to deploy land-based intermediate-range missiles in those regions until those regions have American-made systems. And nobody actually responded to this. They did not respond in the United States, they did not respond in Europe, as if they have not heard it. We have a lot of experts here, and you don't need an additional explanation. You say once or twice or 5 times, but you have no response, no reaction. And then we heard from the American military that the first step would be made in Asia. But it's also important for us, like where in Asia, whether it could actually reach Russian territory or not. And now we know the cause for their withdrawal, not Russia and not some nebulous breaches of the treaty. If they want to have their weapons deployed in Asia, then Asia is the reason why they withdrew. The experts, I guess, understand this. And however they would try to conceal it, and the media would try to conceal it, this is an evident fact. We are discussing Asian problems, so we'll see what's going to happen next, where those systems are going to appear in Asia and who is going to be threatened. This is very, very bad, though, because we will have a mirror response. Would it turn the situation for the better? No. It could only worsen the situation, create new threats. But I hope until the final decision is done, we have some opportunity to resolve the situation. And if I would address it to the presidents of Kazakhstan, could you say a couple of words about this? About Fyodor Lukyanov's question. As to who will be closer to God, this question. Yes, this is very interesting too. But you said about Kazakhstan global leadership when it comes to nuclear disarmament. Could you say a couple of words about security? Yes, we have a moral and a political right to talk about this, because by the decree of the president in 1991, we closed the Semipalatinsk nuclear test site. And since then, we have been talking about the importance of nuclear disarmament. We understand that this issue is very complex. The Non-Proliferation Treaty of 1968 has not been functioning, and we have de facto nuclear powers, and we have various states who are on the verge of having nuclear weapons, and we need to strive for a nuclear-free world, and Kazakhstan is a proponent of such a world. And everything else has to be done by the members of the nuclear club and those countries who want to become nuclear powers. But having nuclear arms in a modern world is not a guarantee of security, and especially of economic prosperity. Sometimes it's better not to have nuclear weapons, but to attract more investment into your economy and to support and develop good relationships with all the states around the world, which is what we do. Saddam Hussein thought just the same thing. I guess it would be right to give the floor to our Ukrainian colleague here, Mr. Pogrebensky, because it's a very interesting topic. Thank you very much. We have diverted a little bit from our agenda, so I will continue to divert from this. I'm from Ukraine, and our country is facing some difficult times, and I would like to ask a question to President Putin. We know that This year we had an electoral cycle. We have new executive bodies, new legislative bodies, and based on these elections and opinion polls, we see that there's a demand for the peaceful resolution in the east of the country. And the new leaders are trying to make their first cautious steps for peaceful resolution, but they are so cautious that they make us doubt whether they want to complete this process altogether. What is your opinion? Are there any political forces in Ukraine which could act as drivers of this process of political settlement? And my second brief question, in Ukraine, we watch Russia's federal TV channels, especially popular various political talk shows, and they actually complain that Ukraine on some TV channels and in some talk shows is presented in a not favorable light. And the same is true for Vladimir Solovyov's very popular program. Maybe it's time to change this rhetoric. Thank you. If you believe that our TV channels, well, actually our TV channels are independent when it comes to their content, and if you think that they present Ukraine in an unfavorable light, then I agree with you. If they actually do this, this is not a right thing to do. We should not present our neighbor, our closest neighbor, and our fraternal people in an unfavorable light. You might talk in this way about the politics of the leaders, but not about the country in general. If you see it this way, then something is lacking in our TV programs. As for the efforts of the new leadership of the country regarding the settlement in the southeast of the country, I'm not sure whether those people who are against the settlement are strong today, especially on the basis of the Minsk agreements. The society wants to have this settlement, it's evident, and based on this demand, Mr. Zelensky won the elections, had this landslide victory. So in Ukraine, they want to see this question resolved. If he's brave enough, if he's strong enough to actually complete this process, he will show himself as an honest and brave politician who is capable of implementing his decisions. I believe that he sincerely wants to do this. He sincerely strives to do this. Whether he will be capable of this, whether he will be capable to counter those who are against this process, this is difficult to say at this point. But we see certain developments. This seems to be unavoidable. He wants to strike compromise, to try to talk with all kinds of groups and with all people, whatever their views, but he still needs to fulfill his election promises, which he gave to the majority of the Ukrainian people. Thank you very much. We have gender inequality, so I would like to give the floor to the lady there. Good evening, Tatiana Kostoeva, an expert of the French Institute of International Relationships. I would like to ask a question to President Putin. At the very start of your statement, you spoke about shaping the contours of the future and to talk about the future. And the topic that arises here is the topic of the global warming, of climate change. Russia has recently ratified the Paris Agreement. And you know that Emmanuel Macron puts this topic as his priority. And I believe that you're entering a new stage in your relationships with President Macron. It would be interesting to talk about this as well, but I would like to go back to my question. In France and in Europe, they have a basic consensus regarding climate change. But recently, Greta Thunberg has polarized even this issue. What has she done? She polarized, the opinions. And as for Russia, we had this dubious sort of attitude because even in doctrines, in the environmental development and security doctrine, very good things are mentioned, but as for ecological doctrine, they say that green economy is one of the threats and risks for Russia because we have a great share of oil and gas in export. The same dubious nature is true when we talk about the reason for climate change, whether it's human-made or those various global climate cycles taking place. And today in the morning we talked about the fact that Russia can take a very interesting place when it comes to green economy. Or is it a risk? We could lose profits, our companies could lose profit, and on the level of global rivalry, we talked about it, that environmental tool might become an instrument of economic and financial war and weapon. Having ratified this agreement, have you put an end to all those doubts and dilemmas? Would we enter into a new social and economic paradigm of development when it comes to our national development and global development? Will this topic unite people, or will this topic actually create conflict? As for common approaches and assessments, I guess this is not possible to have this, and experts in various areas who in this or that way try to answer why the climate is changing have not provided any straightforward answers. There are different points of view, and I have heard them. There are people who say that those are some global changes in space, and this affects our planet, and such changes happen periodically. And I was on the river Lena, there are high shores, and you could see remnants of tropical mammals coming from tropical seas. And this is our high north, extreme north.
So the climate there used to be radically different. Back then there were no man-made emissions. So far there is no clear-cut answer. But however that may be, my position is as follows. If, in however small a degree, humanity affects the environment and the climate, and this brings about some consequences, if there is anything we can do to slow this process down, to mitigate its negative consequences, then we have to do our utmost. This is our position. Regardless of any differences and contradictions, we're going to support this process in the world to fight against climate change. Indeed, we've ratified the Paris Agreement, and we intend to stick to it. You asked about doubts and arguments. Well, they've already been there, but look at the commitments we have assumed. We have committed ourselves to decrease our emissions by 70–75% as compared to the 1990 level, whereas the EU has committed itself to decrease the emissions by 60%. We have adopted a whole national program in environment protection, and item by item we list there what we are supposed to do, and we provide the timetable for that. We've got 12 federal programs that are part of the national project to improve the situation in the environment. By 20%, we intend to decrease the emissions in 12 big Russian cities where emissions have an adverse effect about the lives of people and the environment. We've got a whole project dedicated to addressing the issue of dump sites, not just regular dump sites, but also on hazardous waste. We have adopted a program to increase the specially protected areas by 5 million square kilometers. We've got a whole gamut of measures. We are not simply implementing them. They've been enshrined in law, so we are full of commitment to work together with our partners to move along this path and pursue the goals enshrined in the Paris Agreement. As for the hydrocarbons, I think yesterday I said that we had one of the greenest energy mixes in the world. We've got nuclear power, we've got hydropower that account for 50% of our energy mix. Oh, yes, 1/3. And 50% is natural gas. We've got one of the world's greenest energy mixes in the world. And the absorbent capacity of our forests is also immense. We do realize the threats posed by climate change to everyone. 2.5% faster is the warming in Russia as compared to others. And we've got forest fires and floods and droughts in several places in Russia, and we are well aware of that. So we assume that we're going to work together with the rest of the world, with the rest of humanity, to do everything in our power, everything we can to preserve the environment and nature. Maybe our partners can say, our friends can also contribute to that discussion. Well, the issue of environment is a concern to everyone. Maybe the other panelists are going to speak on that. President Aliyev, I fully support what President Putin has said. And I'd like to say that Azerbaijan is also using natural gas as well as hydropower to generate electricity. So in that sense, we're also performing our obligations in terms of emissions cuts. Of course, this issue is of a global nature, and it is up to the biggest emitters, so to speak, to make the decisive step. Territorially, our country is small, our population is not that big either, so we're not having a significantly big impact upon global processes. But as responsible members of the international community, we're doing what we can to improve the environmental situation both in our country and in the Caspian region, because, well, that is what we're supposed to do in the region as a whole. Anyone else who'd like to add? Our panelists? Well, Kazakhstan is also an oil-producing country. Yes. The energy mix of Kazakhstan is set in such a way is that 74% is coal, even though others think that we are mostly living off oil and gas. Well, of course, oil is one of the leading sources of revenue. But right now, we are developing gas, creating gas pipelines from Florida to the capital. We're working together with the Russian Federation to work through the issue of gasifying northern cities of Kazakhstan. As for green technologies, the energy mix of Kazakhstan, well, in it, these green technologies account for no more than 1.5%. But of course, our goal is to develop green technologies, the so-called renewables. But we've got to understand that this is very expensive, and one cannot transition to green technologies in a blink of an eye. Even in Europe, it took some time. It was difficult. So what do you expect us to do? We've got to be realistic and pragmatic. As for climate change, a very prominent scientist once told me that this issue had been discussed 3 centuries ago, 200 years ago, a century ago. So, as it were, It's an issue that is under discussion for many, many years, and there are different hypotheses and ideas. So we shouldn't exaggerate what is happening to the climate. As for the Paris Agreement, it's a universal document. We've joined it. We're going to perform our obligations under the Paris Agreement. But we have to underscore that one shouldn't harbor any illusions with regard to renewables. We've got to stay realistic. And it is also important that for another 300 years, people will talk about this issue so that humanity survives. If you don't mind, I'm going to cut in the discussion. I'd like to speak in defense of our Valdai participants. They put forth some questions in advance. Angela Stant and Jill Doherty are asking President Putin, and of course this is a question that can go to the rest of the panelists. They're asking the following. Right now the US is undergoing some internal difficulties, especially over the recent weeks. It's hard to understand exactly what is happening inside. The internal politics is reigning supreme. How is it possible to build a relation with such a country amid such conditions? Maybe one should wait. And another question in the same vein from Professor Van Eve, China. He is asking whether you can share some experience with the Chinese leadership, because they do not understand how to build these relationships. Maybe there is a secret you have, President Putin. I don't think the Chinese need our advice. If they say that they don't understand anything, they simply don't want you to know that they understand. Maybe they think it is to their advantage for everyone else to think they don't understand what's happening. Publicly and even behind closed door, we often say that I've got friendly relations with the head of China. And he is a politician of the world class, top-notch, and he and the leadership understand everything very well. They are prepared for any eventuality. Now, as for the internal developments of the US and how to deal with it when they so immersed in internal politics, I can say that when this electoral campaign is apace, well, it's only natural. But in the US, all of this has taken some excessive forms, something unseen before in the history. But the life goes by. You've got to make some adjustments, but you cannot but work with such a global power as the US. And we intend to work with the US to the extent it is willing. Your Majesty, you also have a very rich experience of working together with the US. What do you think of the current situation? What do you make of it?
I think His Excellency the President answered for all of us on this.
Well, in that case, a follow-up question. Professor Boniface, France, I don't see him, but he is asking the following. Speaking in front of diplomats recently, President Macron has said that the so-called deep state, the deep structures in the administration are hindering the relations with Russia. They are putting obstacles in his way. So the question is, why such structures impede the relations with Russia? What administration are you referring to? In France. He's talking about the government of France. So who is the president of France, me or Emmanuel Macron? You've got to address this question to him. You don't ask me these questions. Besides, I didn't hear him say that. If there is anyone who is putting spokes in his wheels, he has to put them in their place or change. You've got to bring over like-minded persons to your government, and you're going to work concertedly in a team quite successfully. Thank you. There is Professor Markan, who is sitting there, he's got a question on a topic you love, President Putin. Could you give the mic to him, please?
President Putin, 2 years ago, you said something about artificial intelligence, what it's going to do to world politics. You said the country that's going to have the lead has the opportunity to become the new hegemon. How do you look at it 2 years down the road? There's one part. The second part is, where is Russia in this? I mean, if US and China are racing ahead, does Russia have a national policy where it can contribute to this through partnerships with other countries? And then looking at the longer term picture, is there a way Russia can contribute to the regulation, creating new norms in relation to the AI, both in the civilian and military domains? After all, Russia did in the 20th century in relation to nuclear technology. So your views on AI now, both on the civilian and the military side.
Что касается того, о чем я сказал 2 года назад.
And now, as for what I said 2 years ago, honestly, I've got to admit, I was simply plagiarizing. I was not the one who said that. It was something experts were saying all across the world. They were saying that AI was bound to drastically change the world itself. And our approaches to addressing essential matters and future matters, they were supposed to change as well as whole industries. So industries were supposed to disappear, others were bound to arise, new jobs were to be created, old professions, old jobs were to fade into nothingness, and we were supposed to be prepared to deal with people who found themselves unemployed. It is bound to have an effect upon medicine, upon the state. Those who have access to these technologies are probably going to have an advantage incompatible with the one provided by even nuclear weapons. What has changed over the 2 years? The pace of change has only grown. What can Russia do? Can it contribute to AI or genetics? Of course, we can contribute to that. Our programmers are working all across the world. They are very successful. And historically, our School of Mathematics has been very well developed. And AI is based upon mathematics. Well, of course, technologies are important too. What are we doing? We've got a whole national program to develop artificial intelligence, just as China and the US do, and other countries do. We are increasing our efforts. And we are not lagging behind. On the contrary, we've got every chance of success. That is why
it would be better if the efforts of the humankind would be joined and we would have common rules of working with new technologies, common rules of interacting with each other in this area. It's important for the world to be sustainable. There's another good question. I would like to ask Alexander to actually pose this question.
Vladimir Vladimirovich,
Mr. President, there's a strange question, it might seem, but let's move on to Europe. In Europe, the European Parliament has passed a very adequate decision, a very adequate resolution, where they want to compare fascist Germany with the communist Russia. And they say that Stalin and Hitler started the Second World War together. This would legitimize the further expansion of NATO. It would lead to various rifts and lack of understanding between the young people in Europe, between the people in Europe in general. How can we stop that? I don't want to give you an overview of the Stalin regime. You know about the repressions, about the camps, about the losses that we suffered during those repressions. Those are very dark pages in the history of our country. But to say that Stalin started the war, this is highly cynical to say that, as if at 4 o'clock in the morning on the 22nd of June, it was the Soviet Union who attacked Germany and not vice versa, and the German forces crossed the border of the USSR. And despite the peace treaty that we had, they unilaterally attacked us with no declaration of war. And we remember the tragic result, the tragic outcome. It is tragic for the USSR. 25 or 27 million people died during the war. Around 10 million people died in Germany. This is indeed a tragedy. Let's not forget that the USSR forces actually stormed Berlin, and any additional thoughts about a contribution into combating fascism. I've just said that 25 to 27 million people lost their lives in the war, and the United States lost 500,000 people, and Europe around 400,000 people. And the German forces, their best forces, were concentrated on the Eastern Front. And now they try to mix it all up, to conceal it, to distort this information. And the threat, as I see it, is that in this process we can forget about the main thing. People would no longer be afraid of recurrences of such tragedies. And all sensible people should counteract this. One more question that brings us back to the topic of our conference today. Tim Colton sent this question, and to speed things up, I'm going to ask this myself. Up until now, we've said East-West, East-West, this rivalry. But at the same time in the world, they're talking more and more about the dichotomy between North and South. And in substance, we see that issues actually are grouped differently. East and West is the legacy of the old colonial times and the legacy of the Cold War. Maybe we should change the way we look at it. And I guess that Mr. Putin and Presidents Aliyev and Tokayev and King Abdullah, it would be interesting to understand why we are still at this stereotypical world picture. We have been talking about the world as the West versus East. So why do we do this? Maybe we should forget this division altogether, this geographical division altogether, and think about it differently. Ask the president of Philippines, can we equal West to the East? No, seriously. No joke. President Duterte, can you actually equal West to the East? And can we talk about sort of a unisex approach, so to say? East and West. This division, is this a thing of the past, or it's a natural division to have West versus East?
I think that there has always been a divide between the East and the West, culturally and financially, except for China was really doing great all these years with so many dynasties. But the rest of East Asia had so many experiences of colonialism. That is why it's very hard really to connect it. They still harbor the Indonesia went to the Dutch, the Philippines bought to the Spaniards and the Americans, and Malaysia to Britain. So any attempt that would force or persuade even a nation for them to adopt the Western ways is always suspect. Now that's the problem. So there has to be a more social intercourse, and this should not only be limited to diplomatic levels, but in terms of exchanges among people. And maybe allowing a certain amount of the East Asian to visit other nations. In terms of loyalty, it's also very hard now to fathom where they are or where the Philippines is. I mean, I'm charting a new course, not really separate from America, but more of the colonial vestiges of the practice of diplomacy. Where we go, right after the independence in 1947, we have always been guided towards what policies. And for the longest time, we never had any concrete relations between Russia and the Eastern Bloc at that time, because they were pictured to be the enemy of democracy. And democracy then, to the Western world, was their monopoly. And that the rest of the world were totalitarian or ruled by despots and tyrants. And that has been the food for thought, even among children. There's always the USIS, it's a library, and everybody attended there, and you can see all the propaganda. Maybe the next generation will. I am the last baby of my generation. I was born in 1945. Practically, but still, the practice of the Western ways are still there. But intellectually, maybe educationally, it will take time. It is hard for the Filipinos to understand that there's no such thing as a non-democratic government in the Eastern Europe at that time. It was always an American propaganda against nothing from the West. So it was not only after Berlin was liberated, so to speak, and that there was this exchange of ideas now from Germany. But it's not enough. It's not enough. This is also because of the financial setup. We are always looked upon as, always sometimes the crumbs of your favor. And I think that America is one country who is not treating its former colony right. And for the new generation, and sometimes if you, like me, we have a hurt for being subjugated by foreigners. So it's a colonial thing amongst the East Asian, Indonesia, Malaysia, Brunei, Philippines. It cannot be solved in one diplomatic dinner. You would need about 2 or 3 generations for the Asians to really freely accept the Western world. And that is true for China. The Opium Wars, the impositions of so many things that destroyed the country and people. That does not go away suddenly. They always refer it in their history as part of the struggle until now. That portion of having been colonized and brutalized is still a part of the paradigm when they talked about releases.
Mr. President, can you wrap up, if possible?
Well,
we actually understood that our hypothesis proved wrong. So, между Востоком и Западом все.
So between the West and the East, nothing has changed.
Несколько слов скажу.
Allow me to say a couple of words that Asia is Asia, Europe is Europe, but we have such definition as Eurasia because Kazakhstan, mentally and geographically, is a Eurasian state. But the classical Eurasian state is Russia. It is the biggest Eurasian state in the world. It is situated in Europe and in Eurasia, and we have the relevant mentality which affects the politics and the way of life. In 1940, this is a historic fact, Stalin met with the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Japan because there were concerns that Japan might attack the USSR. And Stalin said to the Japanese foreign minister that we Asians have to keep together. I'm not a fan of Stalin, but the very issue itself, Asians and Eurasians should actually keep together. Dear colleagues, our president has a very busy schedule, and I guess that all the leaders present here also have a busy schedule, so I apologize for not providing everyone the opportunity to ask a question. So, in conclusion, I would like to ask the last question and then to give the floor to Fyodor Volkyanov. And this question is addressed to Mr. Putin and His Majesty. For 4 days, we have been discussing various issues related to the current state of the global order. And the conclusion was such as that it is currently in crisis. And the future global order will be formed with the renaissance role of the Middle Eastern countries. How do you see the future global order? That's my question.
Well, definitely since Arab Spring, the Middle East is at a crossroads, and I hope that we will look back, hopefully not into the too distant future, that actually it was a good thing. Having said that, we still have tremendous obstacles to overcome, whether it's just on the borders of Jordan, but also further afield. I'll go back to what I initially said. I think that the future challenge that we still have over the next decade or two is this counter-radicalization challenge that hopefully will move away from being a military intelligence one to the ones of hearts and minds. And I still will go back to the issue that to this day, I know the President understands that, but the international community still doesn't understand what the enemy is. And unless we understand the challenge that we have inside of Islam with the other religions, this challenge will continue to create insecurity for the whole world. I know that we have a colleague from India. If you look at how India dealt with the radicalization that we saw in Syria and Iraq, of a country that has probably one of the largest Muslim populations in the world, only 100 fighters went to Syria and Iraq. 70 of them were recruited in the Gulf, so actually 30. When you look at Bulgaria that sent 0 foreign fighters to Syria and Iraq, yet a little island in the Caribbean called Tobago sent 175, means that people still don't understand the threat. And until we understand that threat, there will not be stability in our part of the world. There will not be stability at Boko Haram-affected countries, Shabab, the potential of the Balkans flaring up because of that lack of understanding, the challenge that Philippines have with possibly linking to Indonesia. So unless we all call the enemy for what it is and work together, then the global challenges are going to be much worse. And this is why the relationship between Jordan and Russia is so good, because we do understand that threat. We have not always agreed on Syria, but we've always been honest with each other to be able to deal with these challenges. So to end this from our point of view, unless we understand that we're all on the same side and understanding the threat, then it's going to take a long time for us to stabilize this world.
существующая система международных отношений
The existing system of international relations, international institutions, and structures was created as a result of the Second World War. The situation in the world is changing rapidly in Europe, in the US. We have new emerging players there, in Africa and in Asia as well. The existing system with its institutions, if we want the system to exist, then it has to adapt to the changing world. And I believe we should not try to break what has been created over the last 10 years, but we need to gradually transform this system and to adapt it to our day, taking into consideration the growing power and the prospects of development in Asia and particular Asian states. They have the right to take their well-deserved place in global affairs, in global politics and international affairs. Thank you very much. For the Valdai Discussion Club, we have a truly historic day today because we have never had before so many heads of states here at this panel discussion. We have absorbed the wisdom and the knowledge from various parts of the world, and this is indeed very valuable. This is in the spirit of what we are trying to accomplish. And as is the case these days, the main source of inspiration is Eurasia. That's why the Valdai Discussion Club will be guided by what President Tokayev said. He quoted the Chinese proverb that people sleep in one bed but have different dreams. But we support the sovereignty and non-interference into each other's affairs. So what those people do in one bed, we will not interfere in this, but the Valdai Club is going to deal with harmonizing their dreams, because it's very important so that their dreams and their visions of the future would be the same and would not contradict each other. So this is what we'll try to accomplish. Thank you very much.